June 1944. Saipan. A Marine Lieutenant General fires an Army Major General in the middle of a battle. Not the enemy's general, his own allies. General Holland Smith relieves Ralph Smith of command of the 27th Infantry Division while American soldiers and Marines are still dying on the same island, fighting the same Japanese defenders 9 days into the same invasion. The Army's response is immediate. Lieutenant General Robert Richardson, the senior Army commander in the Pacific, flies to Saipan. He reportedly tells Holland Smith that Marines are nothing more than beach runners who have no business commanding large ground forces. Then, without authorization from anyone, Richardson lands on the island and personally awards commendations to the 27th Division. A deliberate slap at every Marine who fought beside them. This isn't a personality conflict. This is institutional warfare. Because the United States didn't fight one war in the Pacific, it fought two, simultaneously, with two separate command structures, two competing strategies, and two services that despised each other so deeply that the Joint Chiefs of Staff couldn't put either one in charge. The Army and the Navy ran parallel campaigns across the largest ocean on Earth, and the cost of that rivalry was paid by 19-year-olds on beaches from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. If you're into history that follows the systems instead of the heroes, hit subscribe. This channel goes where the data leads, even when it makes the greatest generation look less than unified. There's a principle in military doctrine that goes back centuries. Unity of command. One theater, one commander. The Allies followed this in Europe. Eisenhower had supreme authority. When Montgomery clashed with Patton, Eisenhower settled it. In the Pacific, they broke the rule on purpose. March 1942. 3 months after Pearl Harbor, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, refuses to put the Navy under an Army general. The Pacific is an ocean. Oceans are the Navy's domain. General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, refuses to let Douglas MacArthur serve under a naval officer. MacArthur is the most famous American general alive, and Marshall isn't going to subordinate him to an admiral. So the Joint Chiefs craft a compromise that violates the principle they all learned at their service academies. They split the Pacific in two. MacArthur gets the Southwest Pacific, Australia, New Guinea, the Philippines. Nimitz gets the Pacific Ocean areas, everything else. 2 theaters, 2 commanders, neither answering to the other. What this meant in practice: parallel American campaigns running across the same ocean with no obligation to coordinate. Both needed aircraft carriers, both needed transport ships, both needed landing craft. And every month when Washington allocated those assets, one theater got more and the other got less. MacArthur was openly paranoid about this. He radioed Marshall that plans to bypass the Philippines were purely Navy-inspired. He believed Nimitz was part of a conspiracy to make the Army irrelevant. The real damage wasn't happening in Washington conference rooms. It was happening on beaches where soldiers couldn't get naval support because the ships belonged to the other theater. Late 1942. New Guinea. MacArthur is desperate, humiliated by the Philippines' defeat, sidelined in Australia while the Marines grab headlines at Guadalcanal. He needs a victory. So he orders his forces to attack the Japanese at BUNA before they're ready. The problem is, he has almost nothing to attack with. His entire naval force consists of 5 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 20 submarines. And the Navy officer assigned to him, Rear Admiral Leary, refuses to cooperate. Leary insists on reporting through the Navy chain to Nimitz, not to MacArthur. MacArthur turns to Nimitz directly. "Send me ships. Just 1 destroyer for shore bombardment." The answer? No. The Navy is consumed by Guadalcanal. Every warship is committed to the Solomons. BUNA becomes the only Allied offensive of the entire Pacific War conducted without naval bombardment. Supplies reach American and Australian troops by fishing boats, civilian yachts, and captured Japanese landing craft. Soldiers and Australian infantry fight through swamp and jungle without the fire support that every other Pacific campaign takes for granted. Over 10,000 American casualties. Australian losses at nearby BUNA are proportionally worse, and the Japanese garrison fights nearly to the last man, because without naval gunfire to reduce their bunkers, the Allies have to dig them out by hand. Defenders of the Navy will point out that Guadalcanal was a desperate fight and the fleet genuinely couldn't spare assets. That's fair. But MacArthur doesn't see a logistical constraint. He sees betrayal. He sees the Navy leaving his soldiers to die because they'd rather protect marine operations. And that conviction never softens. His response is to build his own navy. The 7th Fleet, which Navy officers derisively nickname MacArthur's Navy, grows into a full fighting force under his operational control. Navy sailors crewing Navy ships answering to an Army general. By 1943, America is running duplicate navies in the Pacific under competing command structures. The absurdity of this arrangement will take another 2 years to produce its worst consequences. June 15, 1944. The 5th Amphibious Corps hits the beaches at Saipan. 3 divisions, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, take the flanks. The 27th Infantry Division, Army, built from the New York National Guard, gets the center. On the flanks, the Marines advance across relatively open ground. In the center, the 27th faces Death Valley. Japanese forces dug into caves on Purple Heart Ridge and the slopes of Mount Tapotchau. The terrain would slow any force on Earth. The Marines push ahead. The Army bogs down. A gap opens, and Holland Smith has been waiting for this moment. He's held a grudge against the 27th since Makin Atoll 7 months earlier, when the division took what he considered too long to overwhelm an 800-man Japanese garrison. He believes Army troops lack aggressiveness. He believes Army officers coddle their men. So when the gap opens on Saipan, he doesn't investigate the terrain. He blames the institution. June 24, Day 9. He fires Ralph Smith, a Marine general relieving an Army general mid-combat, unprecedented in the history of the United States military. The Army's counter-argument is legitimate. The Buckner Board, convened after the battle, found that Holland Smith never inspected the 27th sector and did not familiarize himself with the particular difficulties the Army troops faced. He judged them by Marine standards in terrain that didn't allow Marine-style tactics. But the escalation beyond the battlefield is what matters. Richardson, the senior Army commander, convenes the All-Army Board on July 4th while fighting is still ongoing. It hears only Army testimony. It concludes the firing was not justified. Richardson writes to Marshall calling Holland Smith prejudiced, petty and unstable. Navy admirals fire off complaints to Nimitz. The dispute climbs to Washington. Marshall and King, the 2 most powerful military officers in the country, are now personally entangled in a feud over a single division on a single island. Both Smiths get destroyed. Holland Smith is promoted to a supervisory role that sidelines him from combat. When the Okinawa invasion is planned, Nimitz specifically overrules admirals who want Holland Smith leading the assault because of Army animosity. He's transferred stateside before the war ends. Ralph Smith is reassigned to Hawaii, then Arkansas. His combat career is over. Marshall's Assistant Chief of Staff, Major General Thomas Handy, writes a memo that captures the damage. Bad blood had developed between the Marines and the Army on Saipan to such a degree that it endangered future operations in the theater. But the worst consequence of the divided Pacific wasn't a firing. It was a battle. October 1944. The Philippines. The Battle of Leyte Gulf is the largest naval engagement in history, and it's where the split command nearly produces a catastrophe. MacArthur is invading the Philippines. His 7th Fleet under Vice Admiral Kinkaid protects the beaches. Nimitz's 3rd Fleet under Halsey provides the striking power. Kinkaid answers to MacArthur. Halsey answers to Nimitz, 2 fleets in the same waters with no unified commander between them. Now, MacArthur had spent all of 1944 fighting to get here. The Navy, led by King, had wanted to bypass the Philippines entirely and take Formosa instead, cutting Japan off from its southern resources. MacArthur argued the Philippines were the strategic key, but his case wasn't purely military. "I shall return" was a promise he'd made on camera in 1942. His reputation depended on keeping it. At the Pearl Harbor Conference in July, he made his case directly to Roosevelt, who was facing a 4th-term election and unwilling to sideline the general with the largest public following in America. By October, the JCS formally approved the Philippines and deferred Formosa indefinitely. So here they are. Same ocean, same invasion, different chains of command. And the Japanese know exactly how to exploit it. Operation Shogo, the Japanese send Vice Admiral Ozawa's carrier force south from Japan as a decoy. The carriers are nearly empty, stripped of planes. Their only job is to lure Halsey north. It works perfectly. Halsey chases the decoys with his entire 3rd Fleet. All of it, including the fast battleships everyone assumes are guarding San Bernardino Strait. He doesn't inform Kinkaid. Kinkaid, on a different command chain, assumes Halsey has left a blocking force. San Bernardino Strait is wide open. The Japanese center force under Vice Admiral Kurita, 4 battleships including the super battleship Yamato, sails through unopposed. On the other side, they find the escort carriers and destroyers of Taffy 3. Thin-skinned ships never designed for surface combat. What follows is one of the most desperate engagements in naval history. Destroyer crews launch torpedo runs against battleships at suicidal range to buy the escort carriers time. Pilots make dry runs on Japanese ships after their ammunition runs out, diving through anti-aircraft fire with empty bomb racks just to distract gunners. Over 1,100 American sailors die at Samar. Nimitz sends the message that becomes legend. Where is Task Force 34? Through a signals error, encryption padding that should have been stripped, the world wonders reaches Halsey intact. He reads it as a deliberate insult. He later admits to King, "I made a mistake in that battle." This was not a failure of courage. The men of Taffy 3 fought with extraordinary bravery. This was a failure of command structure. If one admiral had controlled both fleets, the strait would never have been left open. A single radio call would have confirmed whether Task Force 34 was in position. The split command, born from the rivalry of 1942, created the gap, and 1,100 sailors paid for it. Step back and look at what this fractured command structure produced across 3 years. Soldiers died without fire support. Generals fought each other instead of the Japanese. Over 1,000 sailors went down at Samar because nobody made a single radio call. And the strategic direction of the entire Pacific War was shaped as much by service ego as by operational logic. Everyone knew it was broken. Marshall knew, King knew, Roosevelt knew. Multiple proposals for a unified Pacific Command were floated and killed because neither service would accept subordination. It took 4 decades to fix. Not until 1986, with the Goldwater-Nichols Act, did Congress mandate unified joint commands with rotating service leadership. The law's architects studied the Pacific War's failures, but the immediate catalysts were more recent disasters. The botched Iran hostage rescue in 1980, the Beirut Marine Barracks bombing that killed 220 Marines in 1983. All rooted in the same coordination failures that plagued the Pacific 40 years earlier. America won the Pacific War, but it won despite its own command structure, not because of it. And the next time someone tells you the greatest generation fought as one unified force, remember Saipan. Remember Leyte Gulf. Remember 2 American fleets sailing the same ocean under different flags and the sailors and soldiers who died in the space between them. So here's my question. If the US military had a unified Pacific command from the start, does the war end sooner? Do fewer Americans die? Or did the competition between the services actually produce better results through parallel pressure on Japan? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've served Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, I want to hear whether this rivalry is really dead or just quieter. Like this video if this changed how you see the Pacific War. Subscribe if you want more history that follows the systems, not the saints. Thanks for watching.